I actually said that LAPD Chief Bernard Parks was the first and only black LAPD chief. And I completely forgot about Willie Williams. I want to thank everybody out there that hit me up on Instagram or left me a message on Facebook. And I'm on Instagram at AlexAlonso101, by the way. And actually, after the 1992 LA riots, the then chief Daryl Gates was kind of pushed out, and they wanted to bring in a black chief, and they wanted to bring in a chief that was an outsider. So they brought in Willie Williams from Philadelphia. So technically, Willie Williams is the first black chief. And then after Willie Williams, he only lasted for one term. He was completely ineffective. No one really respected Willie Williams as a chief here in Los Angeles. And then Bernard Parks, who was an insider, was the chief after Willie Williams. I believe Willie Williams lasted from about 93 to 98, and then that's when Bernard Parks came in. So I apologize for forgetting about Willie Williams. He's technically the first black chief of the LAPD, but I guess you can say Bernard Parks is the first black chief from within the department. I said something about Houston being more violent than Los Angeles, so I decided to look up the homicide numbers between Houston and Los Angeles. And keep in mind, Houston is actually a smaller population than Los Angeles. Los Angeles has 4 million people, and Houston has just under 3 million. I think it's somewhere about 2.7 million or something like that. So these make the numbers in Houston even have a higher homicide rate. So I decided just to look at homicides as a comparison. And for example, in 2015, Houston had 303 murders when Los Angeles had 283. So which city was more violent between Houston and Los Angeles, at least in 2015? So those 303 homicides are occurring in a smaller city, a smaller population. So also in 2017, Los Angeles actually had 282 homicides when Houston had 269. And even though Los Angeles had about 13 more homicides in 2017, keep in mind, Houston's 269 would still be a higher murder rate because of the smaller population. And 2018, which is the most recent year I have numbers for both cities, Houston had 279 murders and Los Angeles had 259 murders. So LA had 20 less murders, even though they have over 1 million more people. So Houston is definitely is a city that has a higher homicide rate, and they probably have a overall higher crime rate. So for those people who want to say something about Houston, you'd be incorrect. Houston actually has a higher homicide rate, higher violence rate than Los Angeles does. And the reason why I brought this up is because when James and I was talking about the death penalty, when we were talking about the guy that got sentenced to death in Alabama, we talked about Texas. Texas actually has a pretty active death penalty, and we're talking about it as a deterrent. Does it work as a deterrent? Do death penalty states have basically lower crime rates, lower homicide rates? And you can see with these numbers, Houston clearly has a higher homicide rate than Los Angeles does. But in Houston also, the state of Texas has the death penalty. And unfortunately, the death penalty in the state of Texas has no impact on lessening the homicide rate in Houston. And again, a smaller population in Houston than LA is, and higher murder rate, and in some cases, more murders. I was trying to get, here's the population numbers. Wow. Actually, Houston has 2.3 million people, and Los Angeles is 4.0, basically 4 million. So LA has 1.7 million more people, and basically the homicide numbers are the same. So that means Houston's homicide rate is significantly higher than LA's. And that, to all you people who are hating on my Houston videos on Street TV, if you go to Street TV, I have a whole section there on Houston. I did quite a few interviews in Houston, and a lot of people were putting Houston down as being fake or not like LA. Well, it turns up a little bit more in Houston than in Los Angeles. And that's nothing that I'm celebrating, but the fact of the matter is the crime rate in Houston is higher than LA. Remember J.J. Fonby, the guy that went to prison for 17, well, he did 17 years, but he was sentenced to more than 17 years for just basically an ounce of weed. And he had talked about the prison yard being a 180. And I know a lot of people have no idea what a 180 prison is. And California has two types of prisons, 180 and 270s. And what that basically means is just the physical setup. The 180 meaning 180 degrees, and the 270 meaning 270 degrees. And what the 180 degree prison does is it gives, well, most all level 4 prisons, maximum security prisons in the state of California, are designed with the 180 degree half circle. And when you have the half circle, you basically have, as the COs have a better view, and they can have better vision of all the inmates. So this would be level 4 prisons. Now, there's also a 270 degree style where you don't really have complete view of everyone, and there are actually some blind spots within the prison in the 270 types design. So, of course, the 270 design would be considered less secure, and the 180 design is maximum security. So that's what Fonby meant when he was on a 180 yard. It's basically a half circle, 180 degrees, and you can see everything that's going on if you're the gunner in one of the California prisons. So, and we also talked about, I believe Fonby was prosecuted in 1998 because of the 3 strikes law. The 3 strikes law went into effect in 1994, and we had basically brought up the guy. I remember there was a guy that actually stole a slice of pizza back in, I think that was 95, and he got sentenced to 25 years to life, which a lot of people thought was ridiculous. And I pulled up the case, and it's a brother named Jerry Dwayne Williams from Compton, but he just happened to be out in, where was that, Redondo Beach. He was out in Redondo Beach, and there was a family having some pizza, and there were some kids sitting at a table. The parents had went inside to another store to get some more food, and I guess Jerry Dwayne Williams and another friend, they played Truth or Dare. They wanted a slice of that pizza. So basically they went up to the kids and snatched a slice. They each snatched a slice. It wasn't just him. But unfortunately, Jerry Williams was the only guy arrested. The other guy, I guess, got away. And at the time, he was 27 years old. This was 1995. He was found not guilty. And a judge literally sentenced him to 25 years to life for stealing a slice of pizza. His defense attorney, which was a public defender, Arnold Tester, said that this was a cruel and unusual punishment. And the judge disagreed and said, this guy is a multiple offender. And it was true. I think this was his seventh case. So he had already 6 previous convictions. And the judge said, because of his previous record, I'm going to give him a life sentence for stealing that pizza. And the public defender said it doesn't matter what his previous offenses are. To give him 25 years to life for stealing a slice of pizza is just cruel and unusual. And what was really interesting, I read that during the sentencing, a business owner from one of the businesses that were in Redondo Beach was in court. His name is Helling Craig, Heling Craig, who sat through the trial, and he made a statement to the media saying that Jerry Dwayne Williams deserved the life sentence for stealing the pizza, and that he's a repeat offender and he hasn't learned his lesson. And I felt that was very Redondo Beach-like, I guess. But Jerry Dwayne Williams actually was released from prison after serving 5 years, because there was such a public outcry about how can a guy gets sentenced for 25 years to life, there was a huge outcry from the ACLU and from other organizations. So after 5 years, he got out. So that's one of the reasons why Fombi had to do them 17 years, because of the three strikes. And just real brief, the three strikes law actually came into effect because there was a girl named Klaas. What was her first name? 12-year-old girl was kidnapped and then later killed. She was kidnapped from her home, later killed in 1993. There was such an outcry over how brutal that homicide took place, and that's what prompted the three strikes law, which passed in 1994. Her name was Polly Klaas. Polly Klaas was 12 years old in 1993. She was kidnapped from her home from a guy that was a repeat offender, but this dude was a repeat violent offender, and he had nothing compared to the record of the guy that ate the guy that stole the pizza. But back in the early 90s, there was an outcry. No matter what you did, you were going down. So he ended up, the guy that stole the pizza, Jerry, he ended up getting sentenced to life because of the Polly Klaas case. And that's how the three strikes was born in California, Polly Klaas. Game actually shouted out James's brother, Buntry, in a song. And I felt that, that's what Game does. He's always kind of giving praise to the West Coast, giving praise to the history of West Coast hip hop. And I mentioned that he had a tattoo of Eazy-E, that's some significant praise when you tat Eazy-E on your body. But check this out. I wanted to look up the Eazy-E tattoo and figure out how that came about. And in the process of doing that, I've learned that the Game has quite a few other tattoos that some of you guys might not even know about. So let me just go through these really quickly. He has NWA tattooed on him, which most of you guys probably seen that. He actually has a tattoo of Trayvon Martin's face. Trayvon Martin is the dude that was killed by George Zimmerman in Florida a few years back. He also has a tattoo of Nate Dogg. I think a lot of you guys already knew about the Nate Dogg tattoo. But did you know that he also had Barack Obama's face tattooed on him, which I didn't know about? He has a tattoo of Mike Tyson. He also has a tattoo of Nelson Mandela. And then he's got a tattoo of Dr. Dre's face from off the cover of the Chronic album. So that was, a lot of people know about that tattoo. But another tattoo, he has Malcolm X, he also has Muhammad Ali, and he also has Michael Jordan's face tattooed on him. And then he has, the non-celebrities, he has tattoos of his daughter's faces too, but he also has a tattoo of Michael Richard Jr., who's Frog from Cedar Block, Piru. And then most recently, he tattooed Nipsey Hussle's face on his body. But you won't believe, he had to cover up someone else's face to tattoo the Nipsey Hussle's face. And if I remember correctly, he actually covered up Barack Obama's face to put the Nipsey Hussle face on there. So that's a little bit of Game's facial tattoos. And he must have the record on the most tattoos of men's faces on a body. I don't know no dude that tattoos other men's faces on them. But the Game's got a whole bunch of them. So that's that. And we got to talk a little bit about this coronavirus. I'm looking at the news right now as I'm doing this podcast, and right now the United States just surpassed China and Italy as the most cases in the world. China had about 87,000 cases, and they've pretty much stayed at that. China's not growing in the number of new cases right now. They pretty much have it contained in China. And a lot of people don't believe that China could have done that they must be lying about their numbers. And they probably are lying about their numbers. We don't know their numbers, but you got to remember that China's government could control the population so much more easier than the United States can. Us as a country would not go on lockdown in the same way that China can go on lockdown. So let me refresh these numbers here and give you some current, up-to-the-date numbers on this coronavirus, because this is real. Today's actually the first day where I'm watching international news from other countries where they're actually showing you the dead bodies. You know, for the last month, it just seemed like it was just reporting names and stories of people you've never heard of. But watch international news, and you'll get a sense that this coronavirus is serious. So right now, the United States is at 85,625 total cases, and that just surpassed China by 4,000 cases. They're at 81,340, and Italy is at 80,589. So, but the United States only has 1,303 deaths. It's the lowest death count of the three countries, but our death count is still climbing, and we just got 190 new cases today. So Italy is at 8,215 deaths. China has pretty much stabilized it at 3,292 deaths. And what's really interesting about China is that of the 81,000 cases, total cases, 74,000 of those cases are totally recovered. That's an over 90% recovery rate, which is the highest of any country in the world. No country is not even near 50% recovery. So something's going on where China has been able to treat the population and do something amazing to those 81,000 patients, because they only have a little over 3,000 active cases. So I wonder what you guys think. How did China just completely wipe out this virus and recover over 90% of its patients? Who knows? I know a lot of people will just say their numbers are untruthful, but I've been watching international news, and I'm watching journalists reporting from China, American journalists, British journalists that are in China, and they're reporting that they opened up Wuhan, they opened up the city. They're showing people going back to work and driving around, and I believe they just opened up the city a couple days ago. So something's going on to where they're able to pretty much eradicate the virus in over 90% of the population. Now let's get into some USA numbers, because USA is getting hit in a very specific way, and most of those cases are in New York and New Jersey. They have roughly about half the cases in the entire country are coming out of two states. That is New York and New Jersey roughly have about 46,000 cases, and the total number of cases in the United States is 85,000. So that's roughly half of the cases are just coming out of two states. And New York has the most deaths with 466 deaths. No other state is even close to that. California has 83 deaths. Washington State, Seattle, actually, right outside of Seattle, they had a senior home where like 75% of all the deaths in Washington State were in that one home. They're reporting 147 deaths, but most of all those deaths happened in that one home. So it's not looking good. I'm gonna keep it real with you guys. We are not even at the peak of this, and it is turning out to be more deadly than others were believing. The worldwide mortality rate is at 5%. So that's pretty high. It's not the highest of other viruses we've seen, but it's pretty high. It's higher than you want it to be. So because of the coronavirus, your favorite rapper, Tekashi69, just asked he filed a motion to get an early release so that he wouldn't have to be exposed to the coronavirus. And he was sentenced to 24 months in prison, and he has a release date of August 2nd. And he's also ordered to serve 300 hours of community service and a $35,000 fine. Plus, his sentence comes with 5 years of supervised release, which will start after his August 2nd release. And he is definitely going to get out on August 2nd. He's not going to get an early release because earlier this week, a judge denied his request. I don't even know why he thought he can even get a request. That's crazy. I guess because he informed in such a good way, maybe the judge will just have a little sympathy on him. But nope, no sympathy for the judge. No sympathy for Tekashi69 from the judge. But, I mean, he did get a lot of benefits. 24 months is good enough for becoming a government informant. Now, something really interesting is starting to occur globally. Because of this coronavirus, the United Nations is asking for all rebels and all civil war fighters to seek peace, or at least while this is going on, to allow people to get to doctors, allow people to get tests, because there's a whole lot of countries in civil wars right now, and most of this stuff never hits our news. If you're sitting there watching CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News, you have no idea of the more than 100 international civil wars going on. But I got some great news to report from the country of Cameroon. The rebels there that are fighting the government, the Southern Cameroon Defense Forces, they said they will agree to a ceasefire because of the coronavirus. And there's a lot of division going on in Cameroon between the English-speaking population and the French-speaking population. And the fighters say that they're being marginalized in the majority French-speaking nation, and a lot of these other the English-speaking region. It's just divide between the two sides. But there are other, other rebel organizations that have not agreed to the ceasefire. Actually, only one in Cameroon, and it's the ADF. The Abanzania Defense Forces said that they have not agreed. They will not agree to a ceasefire. But that's some good news because it makes me think about the gang negotiations going on in Los Angeles, and whether or not if the coronavirus could have an impact on neighborhoods just saying, hey, man, let's just come together. Because if you have rebel forces that are involved in civil wars in countries throughout the world that are down to say, let's have a ceasefire, a small neighborhood gang in Los Angeles County can most likely pull off the same thing. Jackey Lacey, I reported on a previous episode of the Gangster Chronicles with James McDonald. First, I said she will probably win the election, but when I said that, they were still counting ballots. And she needed 50% or more, 50% plus one, to win the election. And they're still counting ballots. I believe the ballots. They may have received an extension because of the coronavirus to turn in the results of those ballots. But a few days ago, they were still counting ballots here in Los Angeles County. And as it stands right now, Jackey Lacey has 48.7% of the vote, which means it is absolutely going to be a runoff election between her and George Gascon, who came in second place with 28.2% of the vote. And for those who don't know, Jackey Lacey is the DA for Los Angeles County. She has been in office for 2 terms, 8 years. She is a black woman. And a lot of organizations, specifically the Black Lives Matter, they do not want her in office anymore. And they have asked on many occasions to have meetings with her. And unfortunately, they were not able to get any meetings with her. And, I think Black Lives Matter may have had an impact on this election because she won 48.7%. All she needed was 1.29% more of the vote plus one to win the election, and she would be the DA. But unfortunately, she didn't get that. She fell short of it, and there'll be a runoff election, which I think she will lose because The third person, Rachel Rossi, all her votes are most likely going to go to George Gascon. All right. What do we got next here? Oh, this is also interesting. You know, with all this coronavirus going on and President Trump is having to deal with trying to get as many people tested in all the states across the country, he announces an indictment. He announces an indictment in the middle of this coronavirus, and it's an indictment against the leader of Venezuela. President Maduro is being indicted. He is indicting the leader of Venezuela on drug trafficking charges and for running a cartel in conjunction with Colombia. So President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela was indicted this week, and he's been involved in a decades-long narcotics operation, according to the prosecutors. And there's also a $15 million reward for, I guess, his capture, which is going to be almost impossible because who's going to capture him in Venezuela? He runs the country, basically. So that was interesting that it was announced earlier this week. It was actually announced on Thursday. And the president of Venezuela is actually accused of running drugs with the Colombian organization known as FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. So that's some serious charges that have been leveled against Mr. Maduro. And he immediately went on Twitter and basically started a Twitter beef with Donald Trump. And let me read you his tweet. Of course, he tweeted this in Spanish, but basically he wrote here that el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, the United States government, in an extreme and vulgar fashion, has made a series of false accusations, putting the price on the heads of revolutionaries. I'm assuming he's talking about himself and his allies, who are ready to fight, who are ready to fight them in all fields and terrains, and will continue to defeat them. So he posted that on Twitter, and he actually has his Twitter account verified. So he must be the only alleged drugs trafficker with a verified Twitter account. So go check that out. Nicolas Maduro on Twitter, going off on the United States government, specifically Donald Trump. And let's see if I have anything else to say about them. You know, this actually reminds me of the Manuel Noriega case. For those of you who are too young to remember, in 1989, the United States government indicted Manuel Noriega, who was the president of Panama. And he ended up sending U.S. troops down there to apprehend him. He sent the United States Army 82nd Airborne. And actually, my older brother was a part of that mission. And they went down there and got Manuel Noriega, brought him back to the United States, charged him in federal court. I believe he had a trial in Miami, and he was found guilty. And he did many years, 89. He got out in the 2000s. He may have did about 20 years. He got out, and I don't know what's been going on with him since. But what's interesting in this indictment against President Maduro is that they're linking him to former President Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013, because Hugo Chavez actually hired Maduro to be part of his administration, and Maduro rose up the ranks and eventually became president. And there are some allegations that Maduro was drug trafficking way back when Hugo Chavez was the president. So that's pretty much on that. I believe the United States will probably end up going to Venezuela at some point and taking him into custody, because there's no reversing this. Once you introduce this indictment and you get up there and you start talking tough words in a press conference from the White House, the only result is going down there and taking him into custody. And also, the United States announced that they do not recognize him as the president of Venezuela anymore. They actually recognized a guy that he ran against. And they say they don't really know who won that election, because who knows Who knows how they're counting ballots down there? But a guy named Juan Guaido is considered the president of Venezuela to the United States. And Juan Guaido has been trying to take over, but he cannot because of the power that Maduro currently has. So interesting news coming out of Venezuela. We may be going to, there may be a military mission to go get him into custody, most likely after this coronavirus outbreak is halted. What else do I have for you? Well, the last thing I wanted to mention was the release of several inmates in Rikers Island in New York, because right now New York City is being hit harder than any other place in the United States, and arguably it's being hit harder than any other place in the world. It's most likely the entry point of this virus into our country. I believe it came into the United States through traveling, through Americans returning back to the United States from traveling. And most Americans who travel abroad and you come back into the United States, you're going to go through New York. You're most likely going to go through New York, no matter what city you're from. If you're from LA and you're traveling to Europe, you're traveling abroad, you're traveling to Africa, you're going to fly from LA to New York. You're going to have a layover there, and then you're going to end up on your flight to your final destination. So New York is being hit harder than any other place right now. And as I said earlier, 38,977 cases in the state of New York with 466 deaths. And in Rikers Island, 39 prisoners tested positive earlier this week, including 21 staff. Because of that, they have decided to release some of the prisoners. They decided to release everyone that's over 70. Well, I guess that makes some sense. And they are going to release people that are low offenders, people who are there for violating a parole and for other misdemeanors. So that's coming from Mayor Bill de Blasio. And they're creating a list to see which inmates will be eligible for release. And they're going to release, on Thursday afternoon, Blasio actually claimed that 200 inmates have been released thus far. And they're going to schedule 175 more inmates to be released later that night. And it is the first time that the Rikers Island population is below 5,000 inmates since 1949. And I guess this comes from Van Jones getting out there and saying that most of these states have to start releasing inmates that don't pose a threat to general public, because there's no way to do social distancing in a prison. There is absolutely no way on a prison yard or within the prison confines to practice social distancing. So that means that this virus is going to be transmitted much more faster and to far more people within the prison environment than being free. And according to this article by the CBS in New York, they say that the infection rate in Rikers Island is 7 times higher than in New York City. So we got to start releasing not just these inmates in Rikers Island, but throughout the country. We got to release people who are in there for misdemeanors, or in there for parole or parole violations. There are people that are sitting in jail and sitting in prisons that are in there for curfew violations. And for anyone that is serving less than 2 years, let them out now. And there's also a push to release not just people over 70, but to release inmates that are 50 years old or over. So this is going on in New York, but I expect to start seeing that in other cities, other states. I haven't heard anything in Los Angeles yet, because California's cases right now are low. They're not as high as New York, but they should start before it gets high.